And we are live. What's up, wrestling fans? I am Dynamite Doug.
And I'm Kevin.
What's happening, everybody? Kevin, how you been?
I've been doing all right. How about yourself?
Doing okay. Doing okay. A little bit lost after being an awful week coming out of double pay-per-views there
Yeah.
with Impact and WWE having some wackiness go on, and then us not have a chance to immediately give our hot takes. And I'm honestly not even sure what's happened in the wrestling in the last week.
Well, then it's a good thing you're watching this show.
Can you please bring me up to date? What is happening in the world?
Well, folks, we're glad that you joined us. We're going to get you caught up today. We are presenting what we think is a pretty special edition of the Two Bros Wrestling Show. As our main event today is about race inequality in the world of professional wrestling, and because it's such a serious topic and an important topic, we want to get to it. And in order to get to the main event, we got to go to the opening bell, Doug, and let's try to do that fast so we can get to through the news and on to the main topic tonight. So, folks, if hopefully you can join in and participate in the discussion we're about to have, feel free to share this video as you're watching it with your other wrestling friends. Invite them to become part of this conversation also. But opening bell first, just some quick headlines. As Doug mentioned in one of the pay-per-views that happening last weekend, TNA, or Impact Wrestling as they are now, had Slammiversary, and that's the biggest event on their calendar. And there was some news coming out of that, mainly Eddie Edwards being your new Impact World Champion in what was a pretty generally well-received card. I did not see it. I don't believe, Doug, I don't
didn't
think
see
you
it.
saw
No.
it. It sounds like we might need to check it out. For the most part,
Agreed.
it did get really good reviews, especially the Deonna Purrazzo match. She beat Jordan Grace, so we have two new world champions in the men and women's division. But really, the reason I put this in the news section is not so much for the title changes, but the event saw a lot of new performers make their debuts or return to the company.
Yeah, not so new performers.
Not so new to anyone who watches professional wrestling. It was the return of the Motor City Machine Guns, for one. It was the return to Impact of Gallows and Anderson after their most recent WWE run. Eric Young back to Impact, where he had his biggest, heyday in his career. And then EC3, as well as a newcomer to the Impact roster, at least, but not a newcomer to wrestling fans. But Heath Slater, now known as Heath Miller, West Virginia's own,
That's
made
right.
his debut on Impact at Slammiversary. So a lot of news coming out of the Slammiversary event, and a crowning of a new world champion that had to be vacated because of Tessa Blanchard being fired by the company, which kind of leads us into the only other real news story I have that I wanted to highlight, and that is the return of Sammy Guevara to AEW. And that is notable because, as you know, we've been following the Speaking Up scandal here on the Two Bros Show. And Doug, what was it? 4 weeks, I think.
4 weeks, according to Tony Gahn. Sammy has completed 4 weeks of intensive, I don't want to call it rehabilitation, education, sensitivity training, and is shown remorse and is sincere in his efforts. And Tony has let him come back to the company. So,
because he was suspended indefinitely. When he was let go, it was because of comments he made about Sasha Banks that were extremely distasteful. And he was suspended without pay for an undetermined amount of time. And apparently that amount of time is going to be 4 weeks. So there, obviously, some folks will think that that's not enough, too much, but whatever. Apparently he has made his amends, at least with management, and hopefully will walk the straight and narrow. Now let's see if he can, follow through. But he is back. So lots of returns, lots of moving around in the world of professional wrestling. Doug, is there anything of note news-wise that you would like to hit?
that's it. I think we dive into our main event unless you got anything else, man.
No, I'm really excited. Doug and I have talked for a while about wanting to do this one. So, the murder of George Floyd this year has sort of torn the scab off of the not ever healed wound of racial inequality in this country. And you're seeing the nation really and every industry facing their own biases and their own inherent biases in a way that this country has not seen since the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And of course, we are here and we do a lighthearted show about a lighthearted subject of professional wrestling, but professional wrestling exists in this broader community and therefore is affected by things in the broader community, and it has its own history that is troubled when it comes to the way that we've treated others, whether that be Black athletes or any sort of minority athletes in the world of professional wrestling. And so I think that, Doug and I would kind of discuss how we go about this, and we want to really, before we even start, sort of give out the disclaimer that we recognize that we're two 40-something white men, and as such, these two bros that you're looking at talking about professional wrestling, we understand that we come from a world of white privilege, and therefore we have our own blind spots when it comes to this subject. So while we're treating it with all the respect it deserves and trying to talk about it, we may not be the most ideal candidates, but it is going to take all races and all people and all fans of any genre to have this kind of discussion about race and equality in the field of wrestling or whatever, in order for changes to be made. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about the history of Black athletes in the world of professional wrestling, as well as many of the things that Doug and I remember. And hopefully, if you all have your own memories of things that maybe you didn't pay as much attention to at the time as you should, then you look back on and see how far we've come, and then maybe now where we are and where the current scene is and improvements we can still make. And we decided that it would probably be best to frame this in a historic context first. And we think of, in the terms of history, it is commonly acknowledged that Ron Simmons is the first Black world champion in the world of professional wrestling, and that didn't happen to the 90s. We're going to get to that. It is a good framing point, though, because yes, that is true in as much as history is written by the winners, and that lineage of that particular title is owned by the people writing the history of wrestling. Because wrestling history is a lot in the way of fragmentation, different little regional organizations, things that were never recognized officially. Ron Simmons, Doug, he sort of is and isn't the first Black world champion, or Black champion of any sort. You actually found some things out that I didn't know.
I was doing some research earlier today, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and he thought the subject was interesting, but really thought that maybe Rock's dad, Rocky Johnson, maybe had dealt with some racism issues, but that was probably about it. And I was like, dude, it goes so much deeper than that. But I did find a fella this morning when I was doing some final research for this, came up with a fella named Vero Small, who was born in 1854. So he was, a century and a half ago, this fella was wrestling. According to Wikipedia, Small's career began as a boxer in 1870, and he was later in a 1881 collar and elbow match. It sounds like he was booked as a jobber for this guy who's a substitute wrestler. But while he lost, the guy who was wrestling was impressed with him and began to train him. So his career took off, and they wrestled under the guy the name of Black Sam. And he won, according to this, Small won 63 matches between 1882 and 1892 in the Vermont Collar and Elbow Championship. Oh, he was actually a champion, Kevin. He won the Collar and Elbow Championship twice. Possibly the first champion of African American descent in the United States. But of course, we got conflicting accounts about this. But unfortunately, what's that?
I'm saying, go ahead. I apologize.
Oh, so just jumping back over here to Wikipedia, it looks like around 1882, he was wrestling in the Bowery, and he had a dispute with a fellow wrestler about how their match would go, as I'm sure wrestlers do to this day. I'm not sure what the booker had planned, but it ended in a no contest after a major argument between the two of them. And this other wrestler, Billy McCollum, attempted to murder Small that night. He shot him while he was sleeping. So, yeah.
Okay.
But he
Yeah, that,
survived. He survived, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he ever wrestled again. That's kind of where the Wikipedia stops. But I thought that was really interesting that we had somebody as far back as the late 1800s, which could have very well been a freed slave.
so he escaped slavery and survived a shooting that was a dispute over an ending to a match. That's
Yes,
a pretty compelling story, and possibly the first known, anyway, black
possibly.
champion of any sort. Which kind of leads a good segue into the idea of that world championship, and if Ron Simmons was truly the first world champion, and what Doug was just referring to, and then bridging that gap to Ron Simmons in the 1990s, it really takes a little bit of a story of the history of professional wrestling to tell the history of black professional wrestling, because the era that Doug was referring to in the 1800s up into about 1900, it was a bit of a mix. Some of the matches were not staged in the way that you would think of current professional wrestling.
Did you just call it wrestling?
Wrestling. We're
Go
going
Southern West Virginia.
But if he's a collar and elbow champion, there's a very good chance that a lot of these were shoot fights, legit fights. So it's really a matter of, you have a lot of little territories. You have what was basically happening in carnivals. Like, when did it become an organized sport where everyone started to get in on it being a show and a performance? That gets really, that's a gray area, Doug, because it's hard to find out when, because it was such a well kept
Right.
secret. But in general, and most old school fans will know of the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA for years was considered the global wrestling. It wasn't your local guys playing at the Armory. The NWA was a territory that was comprised of other territories, and their champion toured around the world. That title is usually accepted as dating back to 1905. George Hackenschmidt won a series of tournaments and was deemed the first world champion. And for 50 some years, that title was just, he is the world champion. The NWA took over ownership of that title in 1957. From there, you can go forward and talk about NWA eventually becoming smaller as far as territories, but then turning into WCW, and then for a time it turned into TNA, and then of course WWF buys WC. So however you look at it, you can see where it'd be difficult to trace a lineage when it's
Absolutely.
so fragmented. But almost every current world title, except I guess at this point Japan and AEW being new, most world championships can actually trace their origin back, as gray as it may be, to that world title in 1905. And therefore, in many ways, the NWA is considered, for decades in the world of what we consider modern professional wrestling, the sort of the canon, the Bible, if you would, of professional wrestling. So what did they consider the first black champion? We found that it ended up being much like Negro League Baseball. They actually used the term Negro World Champion, and wrestling was segregated. So you would have, Doug, you'd have your black champion, and then you'd have your white champion, which I know seems kind of mind-boggling to us these days. Actually, I want to share my screen here.
Sure. Here we go.
All right.
All right. You are sharing.
So, as far as the NWA goes, Doug, this was the first Negro world champion, and then 1936. Actually, I apologize. That was not the NWA's world champion. That was the champion that they took the idea for a Negro champion from. But Reginald was the first in organized wrestling to have a title, which was, of course, segregated. He was a Negro world champion in their terminology, and which was maybe different than the championships they had previously or your regional championships. But because they had that belt, Doug, they had the NWA recognize that title for almost 30 years. So it was not a brief and distant, the Negro leagues in professional baseball were for a period of time. This went all the way up until the civil rights movement. The NWA had segregated leagues. You're now looking at Luther Lindsay, who was a very famous wrestler because he was a former NFL football player, and he was a Negro League a Negro League champion in 1955. Doug, you recognize this guy probably. Most of our old school fans might have seen him wrestle.
Yeah.
Bobo Brazil. Doug, do you remember him looking like that?
I don't. I do not.
Because wrestlers can go for so long and the act can extend and men will wrestle into their 40s or 50s. The Bobo Doug and I remember, and that you probably will remember if you do remember him at all, was as a man who lost all the time and had a pot belly, was probably in his 50s or 60s by the time we saw him winding up his career in, I'd say, Doug, what, late 70s, early 80s?
As a side note, I did find some info about Bobo. He was a world heavyweight champion in 1966, but for the WWA, which I believe was a Los Angeles break off of the NWA, which eventually came back around to be NWA Hollywood. But yeah, Bobo Brazil was WWA world champion in 1966, or yeah, WWA.
Here you got Sweet Daddy Sika. He was the champion in 57. And again, as I said, the NWA recognized a Negro world champion all the way up until the Civil Rights Movement in 1967. And in Orlando, Florida, the final champion and the final title holder for the National Wrestling Alliance in segregation was Sailor Art Thomas, who you see there on your screen. Doug, I won't stop sharing now.
All righty. There we go.
But as you were saying, you found that Bobo was a champion of an offshoot.
And that's the thing here, like you're talking about, because we're talking about the territory days when there were so many different organizations. You have these regional championships, and I think we talked about this too, where people could see, if you were to follow them from town to town, you could probably see the match multiple nights and see the same championship change hands every single night, out on the road. But there's so many different organizations, it's hard to pinpoint who was first and when.
And that is a great point. And I mean, that's something that is absolutely worth mentioning, because pre-internet days, if you were seeing the same title change over and over, or only the folks that were in the crowd that night actually saw a title change hands, if it was not officially recognized, then it's like it never happened. Nowadays, we all are on our phones. We report exactly what we saw in the arena. We film what we saw in the arena. They can't do that anymore. Back then, those things, there's Ric Flair, who knows how many world title reigns he actually had, because so many fans saw him win that belt. But you mentioned Bobo for the WWA or whatever that breakoff organization.
WWA, yeah.
Bobo Brazil beat Buddy Rogers for the NWA World Championship. So does that make him the first world champion who was black?
No,
because 1956. This is what happened. Buddy Rogers was injured. And because of that, and Bobo being the face, being the man, I am not going to accept this belt because of an injured wrestler, and he returned it. And the NWA doesn't recognize that as the crowd that night went home thinking they saw the first black world champion. They were meant to go home thinking they saw the first black world champion. It sent everyone home happy, but they knew from the get-go that wasn't going to be the way that it was going to be recognized down the road. So it does become really tricky trying to trace a lineage on a carnival, basically, that is trying to, the whole idea is subterfuge.
Right. Yeah, because you've got your Carney land really in full effect.
It definitely is. And let's be honest too, what would happen back in the day, obviously segregation as far as the wrestling went itself was troublesome and problematic, but there was racism that was both obvious like that, and then subtle, but still racism nonetheless. People who may not have considered themselves racist, again, this is the history of wrestling. To get in the history of black wrestling, you have to understand with the NWA, your world champion was decided by a vote. These little territories each had a booker or whomever that was who was in charge of their territory, but was part of a larger board. I think we lost Doug here. Hopefully he's back with us in a second. But because of that, you would have instances of wrestlers who would maybe be wanting to be pushed by their particular promoter, and the other promoters would vote them down. Truthfully, it was economic for most of these gentlemen. They thought that the crowd would not buy a black athlete as the top of the card. So they kept them either in their segregated matches, or they kept them down on the card and not in their main events. They did not see them as world champion material. They didn't see them as being the head of the local territories, and that sort of subtle racism worked against the black athletes in that era. I'm not sure where we lost Doug. Well, hopefully he returns in a second, or I hear from him, and hopefully you're still hearing me. Well, Doug says his internet has crashed, so I'm going to let him know that we're waiting on him. When he can come back, it appears to be.
Okay.
It looks like he's back. Okay, folks, he is back.
I had an internet issue. Sorry there.
Apparently, the powers that be, Doug, do not want you speaking the truth.
I guess so.
So we were just, I kept going and
good.
Talking about the fact that, the NWA was a board, and oftentimes the board would vote against what the wishes were of, and all these were white men, of course, because they were, of the time.
Sure.
They're going to be the ones leading these organizations. And as I was saying, Doug, to the people watching, that for many of these, the subtle racism was the economic idea that people wouldn't pay to see a black a performer at the top of your card. So therefore they were kept down. And also shamefully, a lot of times they thought that people would pay to boo them and not cheer them. So you oftentimes had black villains, but you didn't have black heroes. Even when they stopped being in segregated matches, they were booked in a way that we were to see them as the bad guys. Doug, I'm going to share my screen here, and again, we'll try this. And that sort of brings us to more the modern era that we were discussing. And whether or not as we've discussed, there can be plenty of debate as to whether, and it's because, Doug, we've said it many times, it's best when it's real.
Yes.
And even though that is a scripted moment, the emotions there, I think even to the wrestlers celebrating with Ron in the ring, understood the importance of the moment and representation, just what it appeared to be. And it might have been scripted for him to win that belt, but the significance of, the young black gentleman in the front row jumping up and down because he is seeing a version of himself for the first time in that ring, being recognized as the star in a way that shamefully had not happened until 1992 in a major wrestling promotion. So it is a beautiful moment. I kind of get emotional watching it when you see how much it means to all those involved. It would be, though, unfair, Doug, to talk about that moment without mentioning that getting to that moment was also a bit problematic. Bill Watts, to his credit, booked it because Bill Watts was calling upon his own history. Bill Watts was the booker previously in the 80s and way before that in Mid-South wrestling. We're talking the Deep South. And he was one of the few men in the Deep South to have the nerve, again, to his credit, to make his top star a black man, the Junkyard Dog, who we all remember from his later years at WWE. But he first became popular in Mid-South, and drawing upon that history, Bill knew that fans would accept a black man as the champion. However, to get there, he used racist angles. Let's just call a spade a spade. Ron Simmons, to get to that beautiful moment, had to endure Harley Race, the manager of Big Van Vader, referring to him as boy, or Lex Luger in the angle to get to that moment, telling him he could be his chauffeur, and just those sort of subtle. But in Bill's old school mind, he probably was thinking, well, bad guys do bad things, so bad guys are going to do racist things, and therefore it's not wrong to portray that because they're the villains. We
Right.
know now with our 2020 vision that there's a lot of problems with using racism as part of an angle, even if you have the racism coming from the heels, right?
Right. Right. Right.
It's still an issue. But Doug, you made a really good distinction earlier that I'm glad you did. This is the first WCW world champion. At this point, the NWA was WCW. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know who the
Oh,
first NWA world champion was that was actually black?
I do not.
2002.
Really?
Ron the Truth Killings, who we all know and love now as your constant 24/7 champion. He was the
So,
first one because it was at this point Impact was
yeah,
recognizing the NWA's championship,
that's
and
right.
he was the first person to ever hold an NWA World Championship. That one we say you can trace all the way back to 1905. It took till 2002, Doug, to have a black world champion.
You see, things like that just it blows my mind. It really does. I mean, when I was doing research for this, and I just look back, and there's so much that I guess it just didn't click with me. I didn't realize it. But I mean, why
Do you
did
know? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
so why did it take so long? I mean,
Why did it take so long?
why?
I mean, I know we talk and say that promoters thought that. Forgotten about that is he held the belt maybe 2 or 3 months. It was not really distinguished by any major victories, no major feuds. They quickly got that belt off of him. They like to recognize it now and celebrate themselves, pat themselves on the
Sure.
back. We did it, but they didn't really do him justice. To me, the first black champion that they actually treated like a world champion as a true main eventer, because Ron Simmons never was really main event before that or after that. Doug, it's the first WWF at the time, now WWE world champion. And I think you can probably tell me who you think that is, right?
Well, hold on a second. I'm bouncing through a lot of stuff here. So, wait, is it The Rock?
It's The Rock. Someone to most of us who are watching, if you're about the same age as Doug and I, if you're younger, you probably think of The Rock as an older retired wrestler who's now the world's biggest movie star.
Right.
But that's to me still the modern age of wrestling, and The Rock is the first man to hold that WWF title as a black man, and he was like a 6-time champion and was always main event. Once he got over, he was always over. So he's really even more so than Ron, and even though that's very important, just for being the first, Rock's the first guy to get there and stay there.
His dad did do a lot to pave the way for black wrestlers.
And that's it. Rocky Johnson was black, but Rocky's mother was The Rock's mother was not.
Right.
And I hate to say it, in this world of ours, The Rock is in many ways wrestling's Obama, right? Seriously,
It's funny. Just
unthreatening, light
right.
skin. I mean, the darker the skin, the more likely they were to make you Kamala or one of those wrestlers that they would say they found in the jungle somewhere and brought as a savage to this country.
Right.
There was a lot of racist angles that we didn't
Man.
realize were racist. What are some that you remember, Doug? It might be a good jumping off. We know who all the world champions are and how long it took us to get there. But
it's weird because I was thinking about this because I think the first black wrestler I actually remember was Pistol Pez Watley. And, I mean, he was a member of the Convertible Blondes. And I think his biggest run that I really remember was the Mop Head Watley, where he had to wear the mop the mop on his head with, the whole thing with Ronnie Garvin, and how, he had to wear it until he won a match, and Garvin would always come in, interrupt the matches, and get him disqualified because he'd attack his opponent. So he had to keep wearing it. I remember so long ago seeing him in, oh gosh, it was like a little armory or something in Boone County with a bunch of other wrestlers. But it didn't really click to me like, oh, this is a black guy with wrestling with all these white guys. It's just like, but that is, I think, my first memory and one that really clicks with me because I thought the whole mop head Watley thing was great.
I loved Pistol Pez. I
I
thought he was great
know.
too. Well, it's a good case study as to how bookers would perceive their black talent, because what happened to Pistol Pez Watley?
Well, once he actually did make it to the big time, he was a jobber. He was enhancement talent. You
And
know,
he changed his name. Do you remember that? Or maybe Shaska?
oh,
You remember
that's
Shaska
right.
Watley?
I do. Yes, because didn't he attack Jimmy Valiant and turn heel during that time and change his name?
So there's a great example of what white promoters would often do to black talent. You change your name to a Muslim sounding name. It was a very common wrestling gimmick. Shaska Watley. You remember the Zambui Express in Mid Atlantic Wrestling?
Oh, I do not remember that. That's
Paul Jones managed the Zambui Express, which was a white man, one who was
uh
a one man gang, and Bad Leroy Brown. If you remember Bad
uh,
Leroy,
I remember Bad Billy Roy Brown.
a black wrestler, put them together, put them in camouflage, made them militant, and now they're bad guys, which was a very common. And now that we look back, I didn't think about it like you didn't think about it either. At the time, I'm watching as a kid and thinking, okay, those are just bad guys. I didn't think about the
Right.
implication of making the black Muslim the scary man. But that is the type of racism that we would often see in professional wrestling. The first black wrestler, Doug, I think I can remember seeing might have been Tony Atlas.
Mm.
And I know you said that, The Rock's dad, Rocky Johnson, was a trailblazer, and he was.
Right
And
there with Tony. Yeah.
they were tag team champions, world tag team champions, and that
Hmm.
was a color line that got broken in the 80s. At the time, Doug, I didn't get WWF, so I only saw that in retrospect. I
Yeah. Same
remember
here.
in the South in like WCW, and that's maybe an important distinction. A lot of the wrestling we saw was from the South. Well, it goes
Hmm.
without saying the way that the black athletes were probably treated in the South, particularly when they came into a lot of these small towns, and the way that they were probably treated, on their way to and from the arena, out to their cars, the insults they had hurled at them while they were wrestling in the ring. Tony was a good guy in the North. When I saw him in the South, the first black wrestler I can remember seeing, he was a bad guy. And it was probably because of the fact that he was a black man wrestling in the South. The promoters didn't think that fans would cheer him. The
Right.
exception was the Junkyard Dog. He was the first black wrestler I remember myself seeing treated as a fan favorite, as a hero, as someone I should cheer. And do you remember Junkyard Dog before the WWF?
I do not. I remember Junkyard Dog, the '80s cartoon he was on with Hulk Hogan, and that's the Junkyard Dog I remember because I think I could see the cartoon before I could see WWF programming where I grew up. So
He had a
yeah,
brief time when he left Mid South. He was in the Mid Atlantic region and all that. And I'm a couple years older than you, so maybe have
you're a
that on
year
you.
older than me, man. Come on.
That's true. I'm only a year. And in that year, I probably saw him in Georgia on his way to the big time in WWF. But Junkyard Dog was the first black hero I remember, and it was going against tradition that Bill Watts would position him as such, because let's think of some of the famous angles that a lot of folks here might remember. The $1 Million Man had who, Doug?
Virgil. Yeah.
And what was Virgil? Was Virgil his equal, his tag team partner?
Virgil was, Virgil was his manservant.
Did you think it at the time that, boy, that's racist?
I think in my head I process it's like, oh, he's got a butler. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's got a butler.
kids. But it's bad that as children in the 80s, we were accepting the fact that the black man should be the rich white man's butler, and he mistreated him,
Mhm.
and that was part of
Yes.
the gimmick. I remember being at the Logan Fieldhouse. I would often go watch matches there. Wasn't a black athlete in the ring, but I remember, because they would come to the ring before they had their own music. They would use Freebird by Leonard Skinner. Skinner starts playing in Southern West Virginia. Out come the fabulous Freebirds. It was the
Right.
most amazing thing I ever saw, because wrestlers at that time didn't come to the ring with music. And here they are in their big sequins robes with light shining on them and the music playing. And it was like a rock concert to a little kid. It was exciting. Of course, the robes were all Confederate flags. I mean,
Oh,
that was their gimmick. I think I might even have or had their action figures that came with the Confederate flag robes sold to children. You get more modern, guys like Harlem Heat, Crime Time.
crime. Right.
I mean, right there in the name, right?
Right.
And it seemed like, Doug, The Rock was Obama. He was light skinned and non threatening. But if you were darker, like Crime Time or Harlem Heat, you were street thugs.
But didn't The Rock end up in the Nation? Which it looks like WWE is trying to reboot right now.
I thought about that with the timing of our show. That boy, we're hitting at a time when it looks like the Nation of Domination is reforming. The Nation of Domination, Doug, for those who don't remember, in the '90s was the launching pad really that got The Rock over. But it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of positioned as almost a Black Panther-ish militant group of black wrestlers. Do you think of a gimmick like that? Do you look at that and think of it as a milestone, as a important step, or racist, or a mix of the two?
47-year-old Doug definitely does see it as that. Back then, like, late teen Doug saw it as something cool for DX to butt heads with and have these great rivalries with. But those were different times, man.
I think it's important to know that it can be both. I mean, it was important that Ron Simmons won that world championship. It's unfortunate that they had to use, the heels using racist tactics to get him there. The Nation of Domination, well, I think was supposed to be black empowerment. But Doug, you and I know, unfortunately, as much as we want to give the benefit of the doubt and hope for the best, wrestling historically has not done well with subtlety.
No, no.
And so it might be like an empowerment angle, but they're going to mess it up or clumsily execute it, and it's
Right.
going to get into that uncomfortable territory. I know we're focusing mainly on black athletes, but we're talking inequality in general. It brings to mind Muhammad Hussein. Is that what
Yes, yes, it is.
they
Yeah.
tried a gimmick that actually had a lot of promise as okay, we're going to have a Muslim athlete, but we're not going to treat him as a terrorist, but he's going to be mad because the world views him post 9/11, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to get topical and show that, okay, it's the way we treat him that has him so angry, and he's justified in that anger, which is a great idea, but wrestling doesn't do subtlety well. So by the time we get to the end of that angle, what started as this is a whole new way of presenting a minority athlete turned into the same kind of caricatures that we've always had. Muslim, he's a terrorist. He's angry. Black man, he's angry. The Nation of Domination at a certain point stopped being black empowerment athletes and became angry black men, which is feeding into a stereotype.
And didn't one of them go on to become a pimp character?
That is exactly right, folks. The Godfather, as much as we loved him, I thought the character was a lot of fun. I had, at the time, I didn't think about it, but yeah, we put people in. I mean, and that is true for foreign wrestlers. They were always the heels. They were always the
Mm-hmm.
bad guys. They were always, and it's not. Let's not. We're here to talk wrestling, but let's be honest. Whether it's comic books, action films, we made the enemy of America the enemy in our entertainment. There's a reason that those good Von Erich boys are named Von Erich. Their grandfather, or their father rather, was a German because of World War II and was a bad guy. So they kept the family name. Whether they were truly from the countries of origin or not, if you were Muslim, you were terrorist. If you were black, you were a street thug, a pimp. I mean, wrestling has been terrible when it comes to the stereotypes by way of the gimmicks. And the topic of female performers is a whole other topic. I think we'll get to at some other point,
Yes.
particularly with the speaking out movement. But I think it's also, if we're going to talk particularly equality, it's worth mentioning a very common tactic that was used for generations was the idea. You can go back to Gorgeous George, possibly one of the first TV stars of professional wrestling. And Doug, why do people hate Gorgeous George?
He was slightly flamboyant.
If you were effeminate, if you were flamboyant, and for that lasted for what, Doug? I mean, recently, 50, 60 years. In some ways, you could say that they're still kind of, I mean, the Velveteen Dream, that androgynous sort of character at the time, at least Dream is like a face. At the time, if you were Adrian Street, if you were Adrian Adonis, if you were Gorgeous George, I mean, you act effeminate, you prance around the ring, you maybe kiss your opponent or something along those lines, and the crowd would obviously shout slurs at you. Your opponent would act just disgusted, and that's the way we treated gay athletes in professional wrestling for decades. It's only recently that you're seeing so many out professional wrestlers in the way that you're now seeing for the first time such a diversity of roles for black athletes. They're not just the bad guys. They're the bad guys, the good guys, the tag teams. They're everything that they couldn't be before.
And I think that's great, especially the love that Sonny Kiss got, when he went up against Cody for the TNT Championship last week. There's a lot of love in that crowd, and Sonny's a very talented athlete, but he happens to be black and openly gay. So,
and a good guy.
Yeah,
like you would think that traditionally, if you weren't openly gay, you were you were being portrayed as gay. You were straight acting gay in order to get heel heat, or you were a black athlete who was getting heel heat because that's where they thought the audience would react to you. To see a black gay wrestler being positioned as a face, that's trailblazer. And Doug, Junkyard Dog to me is a trailblazer. Tony Atlas, we mentioned Rocky Johnson, obviously Bobo.
Absolutely, yeah.
What are some other black athletes through your time as a professional wrestling fan would you consider trailblazers in the sport?
I've got to say, I think Shelton Benjamin never got the love to this day, the love and recognition, because I remember trying to describe him once to a friend of ours who's not a wrestling fan, and trying to sell him on watching a pay-per-view with us and saying, no, this guy is amazing. He's like Spider-Man, the way he jumps around the ring and moves. It's like, you're going to love this. But, Shelton Benjamin, Kofi, Kofi, after years and years of hard work and loyalty to the company, finally, got that title. Yeah, he didn't get to keep it long and lost it in 20 some seconds. But
Kofi is definitely a trailblazer, because the WWF, WWE as they became, I mean, they are wrestling and everyone else is fighting for second place. And that's 50 some years of history. They had The Rock in the 90s. They had a brief run with Mark Henry. Kofi's the next man. That's three black world champions in 50 some years of history. And
Mark was world champion in 2011.
Yeah. And look at the way that Kofi was received. Kofi is the first face dark skin man that they were convinced people would cheer for, and the fans actually made that happen. They wanted it so bad. I remember myself going to see a show in Huntington. I was by myself, and this was at the time that Kofi was the champion. I had never seen so many black families, young black men, black children walking around with belts, and I felt as an outsider in that world, as the white man looking on, realizing that how important it was for those children to see representation, see themselves in the hero, instead of these little wrestling fans cheering a white hero. It's kind of how I felt emotional walking out of Black Panther, to be honest, like to see what it meant to the those in the audience I was leaving with that were, either black young men or black young women or black families, that there for the first time going to the theater that I took for granted, that I go to all the time and see heroes and
Right.
on the big screen, they were seeing themselves represented as the main attraction for the first time. And Kofi was received that way by the crowd I was in that night. Like, it meant more than just seeing a professional wrestler who happened to be scripted to hold a belt for a little bit. When you saw the video of Kofi returning to Africa with that title, and I'm sure you saw that too, Doug. If you're not, it's on the WWE Network. There's a little documentary about him taking that belt back to his home country. He's actually the first African-born wrestler to hold a world championship, and they treated him like Bob Marley returning to Jamaica or something. It was like true national heroism, and people might from the outside look at that and go, "Don't they know it's fake?" But that's not the point.
Right.
Black Panther is fake too. It is the idea of representation, and that is what has been so terribly lacking. And for that reason, Kofi is a major trailblazer in the history of black professional wrestling. Ernie Ladd, if I could go back for a little bit, he was, one that a lot of professional wrestlers, particularly black professional wrestlers, will give credit to as being someone that they looked up to and who mentored them as they came away in the business. Obviously, Bobo, despite problems, Godfather, the character was maybe problematic. He was maybe loved for a lot of the wrong reasons, but he was one of the most over faces of the Attitude Era and was man. Booker T. I'm not a fan of Booker T's commentary. I can't stand to hear him talk on commentary because I just don't like his commentary. I loved him as a wrestler, particularly in WCW, not so much the King Booker days, but he was maybe even before The Rock because he got there first. If you want to talk world champions who was treated as serious, he was treated main event. He was, once he got to the top of the card, he was at the top of the card as a black, dark-skinned black man who was a face.
Was Booker T in the Main Event Mafia?
Yes, he was in Impact.
Isn't that when he was doing his really weird accent?
Yes, that's where that started. Okay. So Booker, it can be ridiculous, and I mean, I definitely have my problems with Booker, but it'd be remiss to not mention him as a trailblazer. He
Absolutely.
And his brother, Harlem Heat.
Yeah.
And especially when to talk racist gimmicks, okay, things we remember. For a time, they made, when WCW was having problems with their creative and Vince Russo got involved down from WWF, and they turned Booker T into what, Doug?
What was Booker T? Maybe I missed this. Did I miss
it? I hope you did. You remember G.I. Bro?
I was thinking that was before Harlem Heat. Was it?
No, it was after.
Oh, man. Okay.
What happened when Vince Russo got a hold of a team like Harlem Heat? He broke them up, and they went with a G.I. Bro character. Folks, if you don't remember it, it was not 15 years ago that the most powerful man in the history of professional wrestling, Vince McMahon, billionaire, on live TV uses the N-word as part of an angle. Do you remember that, Doug?
I do remember that.
Booker was involved in that too. That's another reason why I consider Booker a trailblazer, because you talk about somebody who had to put up with racist BS. Mm-hmm. It was scripted to supposedly be funny. The out of touch white owner comes up and acts black to the black athlete. And at the time, one of Booker's catchphrases was, "Tell me he didn't just say that." And that was the line that Booker followed up with, after Vince strolls up and says, "What up, my," and then he uses that awful word. But the owner of a international company, a billionaire, should know better than to use the N-word ever, even if it's a scripted, on television as part of an angle. It's just unnecessary, but it's just an example of how, for as far as we've come, that wasn't ancient history. That's not that long ago that we were doing that sort of thing.
And to piggyback on that, you shared a article on our Facebook page about from Big Swole talking about the struggles that in 2019 2020 in modern day that she has to deal with. And I thought it was very just bizarre to me that promoters would say, "I'm sorry, I don't have anything for you. I've got enough black wrestlers. I've got like everybody has like a quota. It's like, nope, I've got my 6 here. Sorry, you'd make 7. Not that hey, you're an awesome wrestler. Let's find something for you to do. But nope, I've got enough black wrestlers on the roster already. You're going to have to go. I have nothing for you.
I think that's a great spot to transition, Doug, into where we are today, because blacks, black athletes are seen more now than ever in the world of professional wrestling. But as Big Swole just commented on, there are still the mindset of, well, we have a black tag team or we have a black female wrestler. Like there can be the one, and
Right.
that's tokenism. That's obviously a problem that still exists in 2020 in the world of professional wrestling. Doug, I have a little list here of some things I see. But what,
Sure.
I don't know if there's anything from the modern scene that you would like to talk about.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen any crime time ish teams or pushes or things like that recently, which I think maybe crime time was the last, at least in the WWE. There may be an indie somewhere I'm missing, but I think there's no sense for something like crime time in
We hope
2020.
we hope the open racism is a thing of the past where it's a racist gimmick. I'm not sure I'm comfortable enough to say that we're there,
No,
because it
no,
wouldn't
no, no.
surprise me if they actually tried a Nation of Domination. As much as I love the athletes that they were getting involved, and
Yes.
as much as you hope they could do the subtlety of but it would be the Hassan gimmick after 9/11, where you'd start
Mhm.
out with, this holds a lot of promise, but you better be careful. I don't trust that they wouldn't screw that up, and it would then become a stereotype instead of in this time, particularly at this time, is
Yes.
now the time to try to tempt a gimmick, considering the poor track record that professional wrestling has with that type of subtlety that would be required to put the sympathy on the black performers instead of making them the angry black men, which is where
Mhm.
I'm afraid it would go if they
Yeah.
tried that. Um, there's no doubt that it's a work in progress, and we're better. This is the most diverse that wrestling has ever been,
Agreed.
especially WWE. And I guess that's where I'll say we're, highlighting a few things where I think that we still have some work to do. I know we mentioned it, or I mentioned it as one of my negatives on, when we talked about AEW, some things I'd like to see them improve. When I'm watching WWE, I'm seeing, Ricochet, Sasha Banks, Bobby Lashley, New Day. I mean, there are a lot of black characters on that show. You mentioned Sonny Kiss.
Mhm.
There's not the same, Brandy Rhodes, but the diversity in AEW, there's diversity more so with gay and trans, and there's more of that type of diversity on the AEW roster than there is actual racial diversity at this point, at least when it comes to black and white wrestlers. And I'd love to see that equation change. So I think that that's obviously problems, because I mean, Lashley, Sasha, New Day, Swerve, even guys on the way up, Ricochet, Swerve Scott,
Right.
Velveteen Dream, Street Profits, Keith Lee.
Keith
WWE has
Lee.
never had some. I mean, they don't have that. You have a quota of how many black wrestlers. At one point on Monday night, both inside and outside the ring, there were like 6 wrestlers, 5 of them black, and it wasn't because they were black that they were there. They were just
Right.
happened to be black and were there. That in itself is a huge bit of progress. And I'd love to see AEW be able to have that same number of minority athletes on its
Mhm.
roster.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Hopefully they're working on it. None, that's not giving WWE a pass, because they're not. They still have their problems. Kofi is a trailblazer. He's a historic champion. But you said it. Is Kofi a main eventer now? Did it
Uh,
keep him
uh,
over?
Kofi's not a main eventer now. Ricochet is another one that has that amazing talent. Apollo Crews could be a main eventer. Ricochet could be a main eventer. And the list goes on and on. But
You got to
Bobby
go
Lashley. I
lockstep.
mean, what are they
Oh,
doing with Bobby Lashley? Come on, what was that ridiculousness with Lana?
you got to get them over and then keep them over for them to be truly over. And you had an opportunity of this groundswell around Kofi. And much like Ron Simmons before, if you book him just to lose the belt and then just go back to the mid card, you've not elevated that talent. You've not elevated the issue of minority talent at the top of your cards. With some exceptions, mostly, well, I'm I'm going through these trailblazers. I'm saying Junkyard Dog, Ernie Ladd, Bobo Brazil. Who's the female black equivalent of those athletes, Doug?
My God, I can only say Sasha Banks. I
She's an
really
actual
can't. I really can't think of who. Do you have somebody? Is there someone?
The closest I can think of, and it's only because she's either retired or semi-retired, is Awesome Kong. Outside of that, women's wrestling has not been as accepting of diversity as men. So there's work to do on the women's side of the equation. There's not really you do have Sasha. You definitely you have Naomi. I mean, you have some modern wrestlers.
Oh no, we have lost Kevin. It is a night of bad internet for the two bros. I guess the man is trying to keep us all down, I guess. But I'll keep on going here. I know where Kevin was going with that. Even I think, hey, and there's Kevin back.
Yeah,
You're talking about Awesome Kong. I think of even the Netflix series, the Glow series, where Awesome Kong plays a wrestler in that. That's set in what, the 80s, but she plays what? I forgot the character's name.
Welfare Queen.
Yeah, the Welfare Queen. Yeah.
Which was a real character at the time, again, showing the racist angles, through most of wrestling's history. But there's definitely work that needs to be done on the side of the equation. When you want true equality, that has to not just apply to the men, obviously it has to apply to the women. And as we said, that's a future topic too, because women have been treated so poorly in this industry for ages. But
Yes.
women of color, there's no wonder that Swole says that there's problems. I can only imagine how hard her road has been. She's a young, talented athlete that I'd love to see get her do, but definitely we need more regard for the women. And the last thing I would mention as far as what we need to do in the modern day, and it was true for baseball, football, any of the other sports, they would point to the field and all the diversity on the field. And then you look in the office and it's old white men. Now, we got Brandy Rhodes in AEW. You got D'Lo in Impact. I know you got Devon as a backstage agent in WWE. But those boardrooms, the creative staff, the people doing the writing, the booking, the producing, the main guys at the top, they're men, and they're mostly all white. If you really want to see a product where black athletes, black wrestlers are given the same due, you definitely have to have more equality in that boardroom of all the organizations.
I think Tony Khan. I know I'm Dynamite Doug, but
It's right down there in the name, folks.
but I think Tony Khan is doing things right. I mean, he's got his permanent ban on Hulk Hogan, and I saw where Linda had tweeted not Linda McMahon, Linda Hogan, or was that her name? His ex-wife. Okay, had tweeted something really ridiculous about some Black Lives Matter protesting and to go along with the looting, and Tony replied to her tweet that now you've also you along with your ex-husband are also permanently banned from AEW. I think he has the best intention, is trying to push the product forward in a progressive manner. I guess really only time will tell, though.
And at the last pay-per-view, the WWE pay-per-view, Extreme Rules, Cesaro and Shinsuke Nakamura are your new tag team champions, probably because of a racist tweet from the Forgotten Sons. I can't remember which one of them, but they were being positioned to be in that role that maybe could have took the titles, and they had to slide Cesaro and Nakamura in there because of idiocy. So, hold these folks accountable when they do that kind of stuff online, because online now has allowed for so much more of the talent to express opinions that, if they are contrary to the values of the company, just like any of us who are employed by our employers hold us to a certain standard, you can't go out there on your own forum and say whatever the heck you want and think that you have the freedom to do so and then not have blowback on your career. That's just not reality.
Absolutely. And two of the at least one of the Forgotten Sons, one of the three of them, quickly distanced himself from that tweet. Again, I don't remember which one it was. Was it the guy that was Gunner in Impact? TNA?
I don't want to say in case I'm wrong, but I think so.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah,
we've come a long way, but folks, as you can see on the news every night, or in your own workplaces or at your own dinner tables, when you're talking to others or family members, or we got a long way to go. We can't pat ourselves on the back and act like this problem doesn't exist, that it doesn't exist in our entertainment, that it doesn't exist in the world of pro wrestling. We have to hold those people that we watch accountable. We need to make sure that the audience is represented on the screen, and that's all of us. And that's middle-aged white men like Doug and I.
Right.
We have to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that, that's why they went so nuts over Kofi. I didn't think about how much it would mean to them. That's a blind spot for us. We should recognize that. I want to see Ricochet as a world champion. I want to see Apollo Crews as world champion.
Yes.
I don't care what color he is. I'm a huge fan.
Right.
They're fantastically talented. They deserve it. It's not true equality until you're treating them as equal performers and not, I'm sorry, Swole, we already have a black female wrestler. That's not the way this works. And hopefully, Doug, we continue that progress, because the work's not done, because if you're not vigilant, you slide back into stereotypes and bad behavior. So while I'm encouraged, we got to keep the foot on the pedal, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's up to everybody who watches this product that we all really love, because it's a release and it's a getaway from the everyday. It's an escape for all of us, but reality does sink into it just like it does every other part of our lives. So, let's keep everybody honest and take care of each other. I mean, just how hard it is to be kind to each other.
It shouldn't be as hard as what it seems to be, but
it really shouldn't.
That's why Doug and I wanted to have this as a topic, and hopefully you all enjoyed it. And hopefully, if you have, you share this with your friends, or share the ideas that we're discussing with your friends, or think about the ideas we're discussing when you look at athletes on your screen, whether it's wrestling or any sport, and ask yourself: is this fair? Is this true equality? And what can I do to help make that better? And with that, I just humbly say that I hope what we've done, again, with blind spots, knowing what we have, hopefully Doug and I have done some justice to this topic. And Doug, you want to get to the finish?
Let's hit the big finish. We are past the hour mark, and we usually don't go this long, but let's hit the big finish.
Let's hit the big finish. Embarrassment of the week. So we were off last week. And because we were off last week, Doug and I didn't get to do our hot takes. So I am not going to go through match by match. But Doug, let me just say that my embarrassment of the week was the entire horror show pay-per-view. In the era of too many pay-per-views and inconsequential pay-per-views, dude, okay, you have Hardy and Sheamus, which didn't even happen on the pay-per-view. Right. It got saved. You had Apollo Crews MVP. Didn't happen on the pay-per-view like it was supposed to. It was canceled. One of the better matches of the night happened to be the match where they had, Sasha Banks involved in it with Asuka. And they did a great match. Then followed ridiculous finish that basically got negated the next night on Raw. So there was another match that was inconsequential. You can get away with one of those maybe on a show, but you have that many matches that don't matter, and then one that was great, and then you negate it like it didn't matter. And then you add on top of that just the ridiculousness of, honestly, one of the best matches of the night was Ray Rollins, despite their ridiculous gimmick that they got saddled with. If they would have had that as a no DQ match, it'd have been great. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, what do you have? A match that had a ridiculous stipulation. They didn't even, after all the promising and the idea they were going to try CGI, we didn't even see it.
Yeah, we had Joe going, it's out.
Yeah. And then Seth Rollins throwing up on camera was about as gross as it got because of what he saw that he did. And then you top that off with a cinematic match that was as nonsensical as the rest of them. Like you said last week, Doug, or 2 weeks ago, I'm over them. I'm just over them. Done. And at the end, who won? I mean, they did a Friday the 13th.
It didn't matter who won, because that was another match that was inconsequential. I mean, it did not matter.
And it didn't matter. You don't know who won. Even though it seems Strowman got the better of the situation, the Fiend pops up at the end. Like again, Friday 13th style.
Right, because I'm not sure. Strowman seemed to get the better of him. Bray shows back up to come out of the. But then I think the Fiend won, not Strowman, not Bray, but the Fiend.
You can't have that many contests and no match. I mean, we'll get to the match of the week in a second, but I didn't have any match. Typically, my match is, if there's a pay-per-view, it's probably going to come from the pay-per-view. the tag team match I mentioned earlier with Cesaro and Shinsuke was good. It was really good. Probably the best match of the night. Not my match of the week necessarily, but there was no blowaway matches, and then there was a lot of non-finishes, and then a lot of bad stipulations. It was just the epitome of a wasted pay-per-view. And so that's my embarrassment of the week. And I probably went on longer than I wanted to, but Doug, this was stupid.
It was terrible. And I'm right there with you. We can save time with embarrassments because, yes, I agree. Everything you said, ditto. Yeah.
Well, what was your match of the week? Let's get positive because I'm almost happy we didn't have a hot take show last week. It was not even worth commenting on. It was that bad.
So here we go. I'm wrapping match of the week and performer of the week. I'm just smushing them into one because we're getting the combo platter here. First of all, match of the week. I'm going to go with the TNT Championship this past Wednesday where we had Cody and Eddie Kingston. I love Eddie Kingston. I think he is awesome. I love his promos. I hope this man is now on AEW. But the intensity that he brings and what he brought out in Cody, I'm not a big fan of like those, I don't want to call them garbage matches, but those death matches where you get like the thumbtacks and all that nonsense. But still, in the context of the entire match, it worked. It told a great story. And again, I can't say how much I love Eddie Kingston. He just looks like this straight up thug that is going to beat you down. You know, he doesn't look like your typical like super cut, super chiseled like wrestler. He is like that old school brawler, and I just love that. And his promos have always been great. I hope this is finally his time in the sun. Sorry.
No, I'm going to get to my match really quick so that I can get to my performer because I want to talk about what you're talking about, right? Okay. So my match, actually, I cheated a little bit, like a week and a half. Since we weren't in last week, the best match I've seen since we've had our last show, it was on SmackDown, and kudos to AJ Styles and Matt Riddle for showing what a realistic-looking, high-flying match that also mixed in MMA, that it mixed in ground wrestling, technical wrestling, selling. I mean, just it was a beautiful contest they had. It shows what modern pro wrestling can be. That's the one that I'd say from the last time, folks, that we talked to you. If you go back and see a match, see it. I'll end on my performer of the week. It's not the performer that Doug had, but it's the same scenario and same situation. All right. So Kingston is fantastic because he's believable. I loved him when I first saw him in Ring of Honor. I later saw him in MLW and in NWA. He's a journeyman. He's been around 18 years. 18. I hope he gets a shot because he made the most of it on Tuesday night. A couple Tuesday nights ago, I would say the same thing about a younger talent, not a journeyman, but a young talent like Ricky Starks, who was kind of hidden in the NWA. What's the common equation there? My performer of the week is Cody Rhodes. I was very much questioning when they let him win that championship. I thought he's the executive. Doug and I both predicted at that pay-per-view he was going to lose that match and that was Archer going to move forward. Mm-hmm. And even though we'd liked the match, we questioned the finish afterwards in our review, like, why did they give it to Cody? He doesn't need it. Well, now that I see what Cody's doing with that belt, I'm seeing here's your performer of the week. You use your executive, you use your TV title for that's really what it is. In the old school days, folks, the TV champion was the guy that would come on your television set on a Saturday night and defend it in a competitive match. All the other matches were squashes. That TV title was how you got new guys over. And that's exactly, it should be no surprise considering his lineage and his father and the business he grew up in. Cody Rhodes is using that belt to elevate talent. He's using that belt as an executive to go find talent elsewhere and pull them in and instantly in one night get them over, not from signing them in the boardroom, but first signing them in the boardroom and then letting them shine on TV. I think what he's doing with that belt is brilliant, and Kingston earned it, no doubt. Ricky Starks earned it, no doubt. But Cody Rhodes is giving the platform and then having the matches with them that is making them look good. Kudos to Cody Rhodes, my performer of the week.
I think it's an excellent call. An excellent call.
Yeah, well, of course, Dynamite Doug would pat me on the
back. I'm glad you finally joined the dark side.
Not the Dark Order, please. That's a whole other scenario. Folks, thank you for hanging with us on this one. This one's been a lot of fun. I know it's a serious topic, but one that we thought needed to be talked about. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And Doug, next week we're talking retirements in wrestling.
Yes. And why can't some people let go? I mean, what is that?
So we'll talk about that. So think about that, folks, and join us next week. Who did it well? Who didn't do it so well? Let's talk wrestling.
Let's talk wrestling. So until next time, I've been Doug.
I've been Kevin.
And we've been off and on all night talking about wrestling.
That's right.
Hopefully both our internets will work better next week. Peace out, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Wear masks. Be good to each other. It's not that hard, people. Come on. Oh, and watch wrestling.